Section 34 of Library Essays, Papers Related to the Work of Public Libraries. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ted Leinhart. Library Essays, Papers Related to the Work of Public Libraries by Arthur Elmore Bostwick. 2 Cardinal Sins. The sins of which I purpose to speak are duplication and omission. They are peculiar to no one class of persons, to no one business, profession, or institution. They are ubiquitous and omnipresent. Those who use the Book of Common Prayer acknowledge them when they confess that they have done those things that they ought not to have done, and have left undone those things that they ought to have done. This statement covers other sins, both of commission and omission, than those that I have specified above, but it includes both of them. The peculiarity of duplication and omission is that they are complementary so far as the labor and expense involved in them is concerned. Their existence is like that of a surplus and a debt in the same purse. To bewail them is like complaining because you have $1,000 that you know not how to invest, and at the same time because you owe $1,000 that you cannot pay. The whole world is out of joint because it is doing twice things that need to be done only once, and at the same time is not doing at all things that ought to be done. The man with the $1,000 surplus and the debt of the same amount may obtain quick relief by paying his indebtedness with his balance. The world will be relieved when it takes the energy and the money now expended in wasteful duplication and puts it into the doing of those things that are now left undone because the energy and money necessary to do them are expended wastefully. It is very easy, is it not? As easy as adding plus 10 to minus 10 and getting 0. The surplus and the debt, the duplications and the omissions, extinguish each other, and neither of them bothers us any more. Unfortunately, there are practical obstacles that do not present themselves in the case of the algebraic sum. These difficulties might occur in the case of the man with a surplus who owed money, if he could be supposed ignorant both of his balance and of his debt, while suffering the inconveniences due to both. This ignorance is the rule, rather than the exception, in the case of ordinary duplications and omissions. Either the duplication is not noticed, because at first sight it does not appear to be a duplication, or when recognized as such, its existence does not seem to be of any consequence. Besides this, both duplications and omissions seem to some to be part of the natural order of things ordained for us and not to be disturbed by the hand of impiety. One hardly knows when to begin with illustrations where there is such a wealth of material, whether we seek it in civics or history or science or business or in domestic economy. As you have doubtless surmised, I intend to take the public library as my chief field of research, but I must maintain or at least justify my thesis of universality by a preliminary trip through a much broader field. First, let us take the age-old universal grievance, the unequal distribution of wealth, which from our present standpoint we may simplify by saying that one man has $2 where he needs only one, and another has no dollars at all, omission in his case where there is duplication in the other. I know there are some people who fail to see two sins in these simple and well-known facts, but most of us nowadays are recognizing that it is at least an unsatisfactory state of affairs. Where we disagree is that some feel that however unsatisfactory it may be, there is nothing to be done about it, that others who agree that it is unsatisfactory are unable to agree on what they would consider satisfactory, and that even those who think they know this are unable to get together on a method of attaining what they desire. These various kinds and degrees of disagreement constitute the reason why these two particular sins of duplication and omission continue to be committed. Now let us take a very big jump from the general theory of socialism down to the golf clubs of Middlefield, Massachusetts, a real place, though I have taken the liberty to change its name, With a population of about 1,000, this model village supported until recently 2 of these institutions for no other reason than the general tendency to wasteful duplication, already noted. The links on the west side and those on the east side had both their ardent partisans. Each club considered the existence of the other a shame and an outrage, and each was only too willing to abolish duplication by consolidation, always provided its own particular links should be the ones to survive. For years this small place supported these 2 clubs, each with its clubhouse, grounds, dues, and assessments. Those who were not partisans had to belong to both to keep the peace. Meanwhile, the town greatly needed a small social club where the retired city merchants, professional men, and artists who largely made up its population could assemble occasionally, have a game of pool or bridge, and drink a cup of tea. But their incomes were not large, and they had to keep up those 2 golf clubs. The situation is so typical that I am enlarging on it a little. I wish that the outcome were typical too. That outcome was that after years of discussion, the clubs were merged. One of the links was discontinued, and the village now enjoys the little social club that it needed. An omission has been filled by doing away with the duplication. The church history of many a small place is very much to the point. We see 3 or 4 denominational bodies struggling with small congregations, inadequate buildings, and general poverty, when by uniting they might fill all these lacks simply by saving what they are now spending on duplication. Doctrinal differences are said to keep them apart, but to the non-theological mind, these differences are not greater than these that must always exist between thoughtful men in the same religious body. It is pleasant to see an occasional lapse into sanity shown by the union of such churches and the consequent strengthening and growth of a town's religious life. Probably it is not too much to say that the whole problem of Christian unity is but a phase of this general question of duplication and omission. In the business world, our 2 sins flourish like green bay trees. Small villages have 2 groceries and no hardware store. Large cities may be overrun with one trade while there is lack of another. These things ought to adjust themselves, but they do not. One can pick out duplication and omission in the stock of a single institution. On asking for something at a department store recently, I was met with the remark, "Isn't that funny? You are the 15th person who has asked for that in the last 3 days." The fact was noted as merely curious and interesting, and there was apparently no intention of remedying the omission, even by cutting out some of the superfluous styles of neckties. The most flagrant example I know of duplication in the business and industrial world is the duplicate telephone company. A telephone company is a good example of a mutual enterprise. Its value to any subscriber depends on the existence of all the other subscribers. If a man could afford to buy up the company and discontinue all the telephones but his own, the value would disappear. 2 companies are simply a nuisance, involving duplication of plant with no resulting convenience. The same is not true of gas or water companies, because here one user does not depend on the others. You would get just as good service if the electric company concluded to serve you and you alone. There is, to be sure, wasteful duplication in these cases also, but in the instance of the telephone, it is accompanied with necessary deterioration of service. I suppose I need say little about the existence of our 2 sins in the household. We are honeycombed with them from the rural dinner table where there are no soup and 3 kinds of pie, to the housewife who yields to the temptation to buy another evening dress and cannot afford an outing costume. What we need everywhere is some kind of a board of equalization with autocratic powers that will rigorously suppress all our duplication and with the money saved supply our omissions for us. We may learn something from the efforts that have recently been made to minimize these 2 sins in charitable work and social service. Every city contains numerous charitable bodies, all trying to relieve want and alleviate suffering. They are frequently the prey of unscrupulous persons who manage to get their wants alleviated by 3 or 4 societies at once. by each, of course, without the knowledge of the others. The result is that there are no funds to relieve many worthy persons who accordingly suffer. The two sins in this case are being avoided by the simple establishment of a card index at a central point. When an application is made for relief, the index office is informed by telephone. The index is consulted, and if it is found that the applicant is already receiving aid from some other source, his request is politely but firmly refused. The present production of books gives us an instructive example of the existence of duplications and omissions on a large scale, and the elucidation of these will bring us a little nearer to the application of our principles to the library, toward which we are tending. I know not which is the more striking fact in connection with the publishing business, the continual issue of useless books, fiction and nonfiction, or the non-existence of works on vital subjects regarding which we need information. Of course, this is due partly to the fact that the men who know things are also the men who do things. They are too busy to write them down. It is also due to the abnormal appetites of the semi-educated, which create a demand for the trivial and fatuous. The semi-educated person is intellectually young. He has the peculiarities of the child. Foremost among these is the love of repetition. The little one would rather hear his favorite fairy tale for the 100th time than risk an adventure into stranger fields of narrative. There is something admirable about this when it leads to the adult's love of rereading great literature. But in the semi-educated, it appears as an unlimited capacity for assimilating unreal fiction with the same plots, the same characters, the same adventures, and the same emotions, depicted time after time, with slight changes in names and attendant circumstances. An African explorer told me recently that the events attending the southward progress of the French through the Sahara and down into Central Africa were the most thrilling and the most important from the standpoint of world history among those of recent times. The story of them remains unwritten, except for a few episodes in French that have not been thought worthy of translation into other tongues. Yet in this period, how much trivial incident, how much banal reminiscence has been thought worthy of enshrinement in bulky octavos, selling at $4 each. The money spent in putting forth the same idle stuff that has oppressed the world for centuries would have supplied great gaps in our catalogues of history, travel, and science, and have given us vital literature that we may now have lost forever. In fiction, the sin of repetition is largely due to the substitution of imagination for observation. No two actual things are alike, and no two events happen in the same way. Observation and accurate description will never result in duplication. But the semi-educated imagination sees always the same things and sees them in the same way, and its use in the writing of fiction results as we have seen. Would that we had, today and here, realism like that of Turgenev in his Memoirs of a Sportsman, the detailed account of everyday happenings, the hardest thing in the world to write interestingly. When we try it, which we seldom do, we seem to revert at once to the dreary side of life, which doubtless exists, but surely not to the exclusion of other things. Turgenev's book helped toward the emancipation of the serfs. I will not dwell on that, for Mrs. Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, a very different sort of book, performed a like office for us. I will rather insist that Turgenev wrote simple, vital, descriptive literature, something that you will look far to find in our modern fiction. Our books of reference are full of duplications and omissions. Search the commoner dictionaries and encyclopedias on the library shelves, and you will find countless instances of items of information given twice or thrice and others left out altogether, of words entered under more than one form and completely defined under each, while cross-references lead the seeker to nothing at all. After working a good many years on books of this kind, I am convinced that the art of making a perfect dictionary or encyclopedia is the art of avoiding duplication and omission. This cannot be done until publishers are willing to allow sufficient time to elaborate a plan before beginning work on one of these books. This, so far, has never been done, and the two sins continue to be committed, here as elsewhere. It is doubtless time for our application of these principles to the library. We have not to look far to begin. Take any city of average size and inquire how many libraries it supports. Is there any necessity in a town for more than one library? I am open to conviction, but I doubt. There are excellent reasons for the duplication in each case, I know, just as there were for the 2 golf clubs in our little town. The duplication in buildings, staff, and books is very costly, and the service, no matter how good it may be, is not bettered by this duplication. The trouble may be minimized by cooperation, but it still exists. Take, if you please, the one item of book purchase. I shall not speak here of private owners, though they must bear their share of blame and of punishment for our 2 sins, but add together the book funds of the 2 or 3 large libraries, public or subscription, and of the dozen small ones, special, denominational, associational, in a community, and see to what a considerable sum it amounts. If it could be administered and expended as a unit, is there anyone who will maintain that the precise books would be bought that actually are bought? We find all these libraries buying copies of the same book, when one copy is all that the community needs, each ignoring the others and each lamenting the insufficiency of its funds. I have not forgotten such conspicuous instances of cooperation in book purchase as that of the 3 large libraries in Chicago, but I also do not forget that it is rare, and that even in Chicago it has been found difficult to carry it out in the perfection in which it is to be found on paper. If we add private purchasers to the libraries, I have little hesitation in saying that the money spent on books in any community is quite enough to buy all that the community needs. The lacks are due to the fact that the sum needed to supply them is spent on useless duplicates. I am not proposing plans, here or elsewhere, to perform the addition of plus and minus quantities that is so easy in pure algebra. I am merely pointing out their existence. From my point of view, the ideal situation in a community is the administration by a single body of all its library activities, even private owners cooperating to a certain extent. Let us refresh our memories with a bit of library history. There are at present a great many separate libraries in Greater New York. That is, from my point of view, a bad thing, but there were once a great many more. New York and Brooklyn were full of small circulating libraries, denominational, charitable, and associational, and many of them had succeeded in obtaining small subsidies from the city. The sum of these was considerable, or would have been considerable, had it been administered as a sum instead of in separate driblets. All the considerations noted above applied in this case, but the Board of Equalization for which we have been sighing actually existed here. It was the city government which bestowed and controlled a large part of these institutional incomes. A city controller with a businesslike mind saw all this and proceeded to act upon it. The small libraries became branches of the public libraries of New York and Brooklyn. The city subsidy and a lump sum went to those institutions. If there is anyone who now wishes to return to the old system of separate control and duplication of effort, I am unacquainted with him, notwithstanding the fact that I know many trustees of the consolidated institutions who were filled with rage at the summary action of the city. That action was in the nature of both a threat and a bribe. A threat to discontinue the appropriation of city funds for a library that should refuse to consolidate, and a bribe in the shape of a hint of additional favors to come if it should not refuse. Mr. Andrew Carnegie's offer to build branch libraries, coming at about this time, made it possible to reinforce this hint very effectively. Our federal government is being held up as the model for a future world federation, and its successful operation confutes the fears of those who doubt the workability of any such plan. In like manner, I beg to point to the library consolidations in New York and Brooklyn as an evidence that such removal of duplication elsewhere would enable us to supply omissions in library service. All we need is a motive, if not the threats and bribes that forced the New York consolidation, then something of equal effect. But as I have said, I am not proposing plans. The abolition of this kind of duplication requires pressure from an outside body or agreement among those concerned. No one of us, acting alone, can do away with it, but there are duplications and omissions in the work of every library that it is in the power of the librarian to remedy. Many of these are the result of growth. I know of no profession whose members are more continually and consistently looking for more work to do than that of librarianship. This quest is rarely carried on cooperatively in a library. The head of each department grasps every opportunity to enlarge her sphere of influence, with the result that her sphere first touches that of another department and then intersects it, so that they possess certain parts of the field of service in common. The departments concerned may not know of this duplication, or they may realize that it is going on and be unwilling to stop it for various reasons. Each department head, like the golf clubs mentioned above, may be willing to abolish duplication by driving her fellow worker out of the field, but not otherwise, and her fear lest she herself may have to be the one to retire may induce her to keep silence. Sometimes the librarian himself, observing the interference, contents himself with seeing that individual items of service are not duplicated, leaving the two departments to do, in part, the same kind of work, though not in precisely the same items. This is but a partial atonement for our two sins. Although there is, perhaps, no longer actual duplication of work, there is duplication of administration, duplication of thought and planning. All this is waste of effort that should be devoted to doing some of the things that every library leaves undone. I have elsewhere treated of what I call conflicts of jurisdiction in libraries. This comes under the same head, though there may be no actual clash of authorities. Sometimes we have cases resembling those of the applicants for charitable aid from various sources. Members of the public entitled to library service, the amount of which has been limited by the rules to ensure proper distribution and to prevent monopoly, manage to get 2 or 3 times as much as they should get by applying to different departments or to the same department under different names. There has been much removal of restrictions of late in libraries with the intent to give fuller and freer service to the public. There should be no restriction that interferes with such service, but many restrictions are intended merely to check those whose tendency is to hamper service, and removal of these will evidently injure the public, not benefit it. Traffic regulations are a great bother, but their removal would not be in the public interest. Neither would the removal of necessary regulation of library traffic, the free distribution of books through the appointed public agencies. I sympathize with our modern desire to let Mr. A have as many books as he wants and to keep them as long as he wants, but this sympathy changes to indignation when Mr. A proves to be a library hog, taking advantage of his privileges simply to keep away from Mr. B and Miss C the books that they want. Now and again we find a reader who understands increase of library privileges to mean taking a book away from someone else and giving it to him. There could be no more flagrant example of the double sin of duplication and omission, giving A more than he can use and thereby depriving B of what he needs. The expenditure of time is a domain in which our two sins become especially noticeable. If one has plenty of money, he may waste a good deal without serious effects, but waste of time is different. The total extent of time is doubtless infinite, but not its extent as available to the individual. He has only his 80 years and 10, and astronomical happenings have chopped this up for him into years, months, weeks, and days, any one of which is largely a repetition of those that have gone before. So many of our duties, for instance, are daily that the average man has only a few hours out of the 24 to deal with emergency work, hurry calls, and all sorts of exceptional demands on his time. If he gives 10 minutes to something that requires but 5, he must often neglect a duty, and this constitutes duplication and omission of time, to be remedied by taking the unnecessary 5 minutes from one task and bestowing it on another. Here again, however, our algebraic addition is simple only on paper. We are hindered not only by our own propensity to waste time, but by those whose own is of no value and who therefore insist on wasting ours for us. This is a subject on which most executive officers can speak feelingly. Such officers are troubled with two kinds of lieutenants, those who keep them in ignorance of what is going on, and those who insist on putting them in continual possession of trivial details, more omission and duplication, you see. One special kind of time waster is the assistant who comes to her chief with a request. Foreseeing refusal, she has primed herself with all sorts of arguments and is ready to smash all opposition in a logical presentation of the subject calculated to occupy 30 minutes or so. But the request, as stated, appeals to her chief as reasonable, and he grants it at once without hearing the argument. Do you think the petitioner is going to waste all that valuable logic? Not she. She stands her ground and pours it all out, the whole half hour of it, and when the victim is granted a second time what he had already granted without argument, she retires flushed with triumph at her success. And while this duplicator was duplicating, the other sinner, the omitter, was performing some innocent and valuable administrative act without her chief's knowledge, causing him to give wrong information to a caller and convict himself of ignorance of what is going on in his own institution. Time wasting, of course, is by no means confined to the library staff. Much of everyone's time in a library is consumed in fruitless conversations with the public, the answering of trivial questions, the search for data that can do no one any good, efforts to appease the wrath of someone who ought never to have been angry at all, attempts to explain things verbally when adequate explanations in print are at hand. All these things consume valuable time and thereby force the omission of public services that would otherwise be performed. Some of them are unavoidable. We must always change up a little time to the account of courtesy, the avoidance of brusqueness, the maintenance in the community of that tradition of library helpfulness that is perhaps the library's chief asset. This we cannot afford to lose. But without sacrificing it, can we not eliminate some of the bores, cut down our useless services for the sake of performing a few more useful ones, and increase the amount of library energy usefully employed without enlarging the total sum expended? This is one of our most vital problems, did we but realize it. We have gone far enough, perhaps, to realize that our two sins are indeed cardinal and fundamental. The authors of the prayer book were right. We have done those things that we ought not to have done, and we have left undone those things we ought to have done, and we are all miserable sinners. If I had nerve enough to add a new society to the 1,001 that carry on their multifarious activities about us, I should found a league to suppress duplications and supply omissions. End of section 34.